everyone, and welcome to this pre-Friday conversation part of our March series. I hope you are all enjoying a good whatever moment of this day it is on your time zones as you are either watching us or listening to us, either now live or later on the recording. I do see comments coming in, and that is always such a great sign. It means that at least technology is working and we're not stuck in some back loop in this wonderful internet. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your co-host for the next hour, where we will be discussing about leadership in times of uncertainty. And even more so, we will try to give you some support and inspiration and energy and actionable insights around how can we maintain well-being and team cohesion. Please do continue to drop us notes in the comments. At least let us know where you're connecting from. And this way you are helping us travel vicariously around the world. And also, as I will ask Jessa, who as usual takes care of us backstage, please bring on the panelists onto the stage and just wholeheartedly encouraging everybody in the audience, please consider this conversation as much yours as it is our speakers. Do let us know via comments your ideas, your takes, your own experiences with navigating times of uncertainty. Because what we see over and over and over again is that there are so many nuances across geographies, across generations, across experiences, across all our intersectionalities. And this is the best way to keep this community learning together. Now, I will try to make the most out of a very, very short hour today. And what I will do, I will ask the speakers to just go with me through a quick introductory session. And you are all Hacking HR friends and veteran panelists, so you know the drill by now. I will pass the e-mic around clockwise as you appear on my screen. And the first question is always easy. Please shortly introduce yourselves. And I am so curious to hear what exactly from the title of the panel and the topic made it so personally meaningful to you that you said, oh, I'm going to take 1 hour of my time and energy and be there. Sheila, always great to see you. Welcome.
Good morning. Here in Phoenix, it's morning. So good morning from Phoenix. My name is Sheila Kruger. Most recently, I was the head of global benefits at Zoom, currently doing some consulting. And I think this is kind of a no-brainer for anybody that was at Zoom. Even at Zoom, we were only about maybe 20% remote employees when the pandemic hit. But of course, in March of 2020, we were all remote. And not only that, but our teams were responsible for everybody who went remote. So we were working with customers. And then it was a really important time for us to kind of make sure we were taking care of not only all of our employees, but especially in HR, taking care of those who were taking care of everybody else. And so that's why this is kind of a topic that's near and dear to my heart.
Thank you so very much. Carol, it's been quite a few weeks since I saw you on my screen. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. It's morning for me here in Denver as well, so I'll say good morning. My name's Carol Cooley. Most recently, I was a Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Pacific Western Bank. Pacific Western Bank was acquired at the end of December after a year of tumultuous activity in the banking industry. So, to echo what Sheila said, coming out of the pandemic and then going into really turbulent times with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, it definitely was a year of a lot of different activity and a lot of uncertainty in the banking industry, tech industry, and others. And so to me, it was most important because my organization was really responsible for taking care of those people that were really trying to take care of our customers. And so for me, it was very, very important to make sure that my team had a safe space to come together and discuss their uncertainty, really collaborate with each other, and also take care of ourselves because we were having to take care of the rest of the organization. So that's why this topic is really personal to me.
Thank you so very much. Jamie, a joy to see you. Welcome.
Good morning from Austin, Texas. Thanks, Manola. Happy to be here and talk about this topic. I'm the current VP of People and HR at Trust Radius. We're a B2B SaaS company, and in the tech sector. So the level of uncertainty in the tech industry over the last couple of years, 18 months specifically, has been challenging and given me way too many opportunities to speak about this topic. And prior to that, I was in healthcare HR, working in the hospitals during the pandemic. And so that also sends a lens. I've had the fortune of being a person that people turn to in their times of individual crisis, as well as being able to be a resource for organizations in moments of uncertainty several times over the last few years. So I am happy to be here and looking forward to learning from the other panelists today.
Thank you. And Zach, before I hand it over to you, I must confess to enjoying so much hearing you on other panels. And I was so happy when I saw that we actually have the first opportunity to share a conversation space. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Hopefully I'm coming in okay. So my name again is Zach Hang, pronouns he, him. I'm coming to you from the East Coast, so I'm the only East Coaster here, it looks like, from the Philly Metro. I have the privilege to serve as one of the senior DEI advisors for Vanguard, one of the large financial services asset management firms. And I've been in the DEI space for a number of years now, probably over a decade at this point, but spent a career in the consulting field. So with big organizations that all of you might have heard of, just little ones like Accenture and Deloitte. But I've spent a lot of time kind of cross-pollinating in the technology space, in the financial services space, in the HR space. And really what kind of drew me to this particular topic is having, being so deeply grounded into the DEI space. We find in studies over studies that when we are in times of crisis, times of trauma that impact at large scale, the underrepresented communities tend to feel them a little bit more. So one of those things that really kind of grounds me in my work, in my journey as a professional, as a advocate and ambassador, is really thinking about how we can be equitable in how we address a lot of well-being and cohesion and in our leadership practices and principles. So as it relates to especially underrepresented communities.
Thank you so very much, everyone, for being here today. And before we jump very deep into the topic, I would invite each of you to spend a bit of time around times of uncertainty. What is it exactly that we mean when we say times of uncertainty, and what are some of the main causes of uncertainty that you see affecting workplaces nowadays? And I know we've been through a long series of acronyms. We started with VUCA, then during COVID we had BANI that was coined specifically for the times during the pandemic. I must admit that my personal favorite is TUNA, that stands for turbulent, unlinear, I think nebulous and ambiguous. At least it sounds fishy from the get-go. But I am really curious, what are the sources of uncertainty now? How much is there inertia from the pandemic? How much are there new causes of uncertainty and ambiguity impacting workplaces? And for some reason, I always go diagonally first. So Jamie, I will ask you to be our pioneer on this one. And then everybody, that it will be Zoom unmuting competition officially open. Just take this conversation with your own dynamic. So Jamie.
Well, I definitely think that we're still feeling the aftermath of the pandemic. And it had such a sweeping change, an immediate impact, an immediate hit on all of us psychologically, that there's still ramifications and consequences of that I feel like we're still working through. When I think about uncertainty, I think about the psychology of what that is. And that's just at the very basic of what it is. It's fear, right? It's not knowing. It's what is creating the anxiety or uncertainty that we have to deal with. And that when people go through a situation of fear collectively, not only do we have trouble navigating it as individuals, we're having trouble navigating it as communities, we're having trouble navigating it as workplaces, and the list goes on, the country, the world. And so while we have a feeling of collectiveness, that we're all in this together, it also means that we don't know who's going to have the answers to make us feel less fearful. And so I think we're still dealing with a lot of that in the workplace. It's coming through I work everything HR. So our benefit claims, we're still seeing increases in benefit claims for addiction and mental health services, and some of those things that are indicators of unrest and fear and psychological trauma. And so I think that's still, like, those are still climbing. Those haven't started to level off yet. So that is something that we're working through. And then what does that look like in the workplace? We've got, we know that there's struggles with mental health that are still coming through from the pandemic. And then we've added on to that social unrest. We've added war overseas. We've, multiple wars overseas. And, that hasn't made it any easier to navigate when we haven't, come through all of the fear associated with the pandemic. And so it's a situation where when I talk to leaders, it's about, Carol mentioned it earlier, creating that safe space for people to be able to come and have those conversations. It's about, if you're leading through these situations, being willing to have an open conversation, being willing to be vulnerable in those conversations. And you don't have to have all the answers, but you can do it together, and you can create a community where you're working through it together in a safe way, because even if nobody has all of the answers, collectively you can come together and relieve some of the fear associated with it.
Sheila.
Yeah, I everything that Jamie said. Plus, I think coming out of the pandemic, we already created another, anxiety-ridden thing, which was the return to office. So that made everybody very uncomfortable, and I think continues to. I don't think that has settled at all. I still see many companies changing from, month to month or every once in a while about what they think about returning to the office. And then also the economics in the last couple of years, really, and especially in the tech space, it's been a little crazy ride. And so, that financial uncertainty is also a big driver of mental health and anxiety and depression and all those things. And I think we've talked a lot about all of the things that happen in our workspace, but we've got to remember that everything is also hinges on what's happening at home too. So if there's things from the environment, from the economy that are affecting a partner or, a living situation, those things are all coming to work as well. So it's just really important. I think what Jamie said is so key in creating that safe space for people to feel like they have a place to go and get help when they need it.
Carol.
Yeah, I would echo what Sheila and Jamie have said already so eloquently, but I would also add, just to state it out loud, I think the pace of change has really also been a driving factor in creating and perpetuating additional uncertainty. Things are just changing very rapidly and continuing to accelerate. And I think that ability to sit back and process as those changes are happening, that time frame becomes shorter and doesn't give people really an opportunity to think ahead and think about what's next and anticipate some of that. It just kind of hits you in the face, whether you're ready for it or not. And I think that adds to additional trauma, additional uncertainty, and just that level of fear that's out there. I think in addition to what's going on, globally, we also have to take into account what goes on locally, and the amount of information that we're hit with as well. I think is a factor. People are trustful or distrustful of sources of information, and not understanding if what I'm looking at, what I'm reading, what I'm seeing, if I can believe in that, that adds to an additional layer of uncertainty. So again, I can't say it any nicer than Sheila and Jamie have already said it, but creating those communities where you do have someone that you can bounce ideas off of and just go to and create that really trusted relationship is very important in navigating uncertainty.
Yeah, I'll just jump in really quickly. I totally agree with all that's been said. One of the things that struck me is like the market volatility, right? And when we think about companies reorging, divesting, whatever the case may be, it's one of those areas where sometimes a lot of times employees and staff aren't clued into what leadership changes are happening, right? So it is really up to us as leaders to really be communicating and transparent about, hey, here are the changes coming. So the market can always dictates really a lot of ways the decisions made at the business level and in our different business units. But on the point that was made about emotional well-being, one of the things that is really striking is that like mental health and mental wellness is not something that's talked about in underrepresented communities, Black communities, Latin communities, Asian communities. It's just still remains a taboo kind of topic to talk about at home. So where do these people go? They go to their colleagues, they go to their leaders, they talk about how things are impacting them, the flexibility that they might need in order to support what's going on at home, right? So between this dichotomy of how do I show up at work and be my best self, and then what else is going on in the home life, it's also so important that that leaders like really acknowledge and create space, like Carol said, about to create that trust and safety, to ensure that the needs are being met at all levels, both professionally and personally. So that's all I'll add there. But agree with what everyone said.
I really love how all of you created the space to take this conversation one layer deeper, and through the lens of well-being and through the lens of team cohesion, which basically speaks to our need of connecting and belonging. I would be really, really curious to hear your thoughts on what do you think are the main opportunities and also challenges for leadership in these times of uncertainty. How can leaders show up in the most meaningful way in the workplace? And Sheila, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. All through the pandemic, one of the things I thought that our HR team at Zoom did a really great job of was putting out a manual for managers, and really it was for everybody, that was all about how to really talk to people, because that doesn't always happen. When you were in the office, you said hi to them as you walked by, and that maybe sparked a little bit of a connection. But when everybody went home, it was more about, how do we continue that, and how do I, as a manager specifically, connect with people? And so we put out a guide for how to actually have a human conversation, and some conversation starters that people were really happy to have. And it was so successful internally that we published it on the blog, so that other companies could download that. So I think that was one thing that I thought was really an amazing thing that could happen. The challenges I find are that people really they're just not comfortable kind of coming out of that facade that they maybe carried at work. And when you're at home and you don't have that day-to-day connection, you do really have to work to make that connection. So you're not going to see Bob in the hallway every day like you did before. And maybe at the outset, you don't feel like there's enough connection there to reach out and just have a quick Zoom call and say, hey, how's it going? Or do a coffee chat or whatever. But so I think, that was a big thing, was really, how do we navigate? The biggest challenge was, what do we do? How do we make that happen? And so it was really important for, I think our HR teams were really the drivers for this in most places, working hard to connect people on a regular basis. And so encouraging, video one-on-ones if you were all remote, looking at, events that were even after hours events that you could do together so that you could form a little bit more of a camaraderie, encouraging people to coordinate on projects, collaborate in real time. To go ahead, open up a Zoom chat, sit and you can talk while you work, do whatever, if you need to collaborate with somebody. So really just, providing those avenues of how do we make that connection now that we aren't in the office to gather around the water cooler?
A little bit different thought when you asked this question. I don't disagree with anything Sheila said. My thought that came to mind for some of the challenges and like what I've seen reflecting on the pandemic in the hospitals, the CEOs that took the time to lead from the front, the CEOs that and the leadership teams that were on the floor, having the conversations with employees on a regular basis, creating town halls on a daily basis to show that they weren't shying away from the fear and the uncertainty, creating specific outlets for people to voice concerns if they didn't feel comfortable doing so in a group setting, and then showing that they weren't going to ask their employees to do anything that they weren't comfortable doing themselves. I know it's a little bit, when you think about the pandemic and how that impacts from a healthcare standpoint, it's a little bit different, but there's some really good lessons in that, that the leadership teams that were able to drop their egos, that this wasn't about their teams or what their responsibilities are or what they brought to the table, and show up for the entire organization as we are in this together, and we're going to show you that we're going to support you and we're going to help you, and we are here to lead you through it. We're not sitting in our offices as a leadership team and telling you to go be on the front lines. We are all in this together, and we're going to lead you through this. That by itself shows a level of commitment and helps build that trust between leadership and employees that can create all of the difference in the world when it comes to the outcomes that you're looking for.
Carol, I saw you unmuted there a while ago.
Yeah. For me, the first thing that popped into my head is communication is really the both the challenge and also the solution to this. Jamie described it really eloquently with, leaders who are able to lead from the front, and communicate, be vulnerable with people, and also use multiple methods of attempting to engage with the employees that they're there to support and lead. I think that makes all the difference. One of the things that was, I think, instrumental for us leading through the pandemic was just creating some of those different modalities for people to get their questions answered, whether that was an intranet or town hall meetings or scripted Q&As that we would post so that managers would have access to the information. And equally important to giving out information was admitting when we didn't have the answers as a leadership team. And I think that's equally important because, if you're not actively communicating, people are going to fill in the gaps in the missing information. And I always like to say it's never raining puppies. It's never good, the things that they fill in those blanks with. So the more that you can be transparent and just say, we don't have all the answers. For us, it was around PPE. Nobody could get PPE. And our teammates were clamoring for it. And we had to very specifically say, we're trying as hard as we can to get this PPE, to get cleaning supplies, but there are no supplies to be had at this point. And you will be the first ones to have them as soon as we do. And I think, again, just regularly communicating that, we were listening to them, that we were concerned about what their needs were in the environment, and that we didn't have all the answers. I think, again, all of those things went a long way to creating that sense of camaraderie and teamwork during very uncertain times.
Zach.
Yeah, thanks. I totally agree. I think I want to reiterate the point that Carol and others have made around the communication, right? Like being able to stand in front of your business, your team, your company, and just really be vulnerable is such a compelling approach, right? And when leaders get up and talk about all the things that are happening in the environment, how it's going to impact the business, but also, like, to Carol's point, really being clear about what we don't know, what it puts the employees, the staff, the company kind of a bit more at ease, because they're on the same page, right? When they don't know things and they're expecting the answers from the leaders, and the leaders don't know, it's okay to say you don't know. I think a lot of us a lot of times we're like, we think about, we have to have the right answer. We have to have it all the time. And we don't, right? But I think the important piece of that is we go out and get the answer and then circle back to communicate what the answers are, or the decisions that have been made by the leadership, in order to put everyone kind of in a better position to move forward and progress, right? I mean, sharing clear, transparent goals as it relates to where the organization kind of wants to move towards, as it relates to, reacting or proactively addressing some of the issues that are being floated up and surfaced. I mean, there's so much research that talks about engagement at all levels of the organization. I mean, I think a recent Gallup research study said that, high engagement levels are reduced. The high engagement levels see reduction in absenteeism, see reduction in attrition, see reduction in so many different things when teams are engaged, when teams are informed, when teams feel included as part of the leadership decisions and things like that. So, I mean, communication just plays a huge role in kind of ensuring everyone feels like they are part of the same journey.
I was listening to the conversation and I was reflecting on the fact that so many conversations around leadership and leadership's mission and leadership's mandate talk about what leaders should do, what leaders must do, what leaders own, and what leaders are accountable for. And every now and again, I feel that the conversation is maybe a little bit lopsided. So I would love to turn this question on its head and invite you to share your thoughts on, in order for leaders to be the best leaders for their teams, what do they need from the people within the workplace? How can everybody in the workplace help leaders be the best leaders that they can be and that the organization needs? And Zach, you so graciously wrapped up the previous round of answers. I would ask you to lead us into this one.
So if I understand, play back the question a bit, it's what the employees or what the people in non-leadership roles can do, right?
Yes. So what help leaders can get or expect from the organization for them to be the best leaders that they could be?
Yeah, I think what's so important is that the space is an environment is created such that employees, those in non-formal leadership roles, have the avenues and mechanisms to really be candid and open, and say, "Hey, leader X, I need these things in order to do my job, or I need this flexibility around my scheduling because of all these other things that I have to do." So I think part of it, I think we kind of alluded to it before, is that psychological safety piece, and creating open spaces for folks to just congregate, for leaders to listen, for there to be ways to capture kind of really tactical, actionable insights, so that the leaders can convene and say, okay, what, based on the inputs that we have, how can we move forward, or how can we put together a strategy to really influence the organization writ large? So it's really, again, it's grounded in the communication strategy, but it's really about, how do the leaders create the spaces appropriately, whether it be the team level, the broader town halls, what's the listening architecture that companies are employing, so that all the employees can feel like they can be open and candid about their situations.
Thank you. Jamie.
Yeah, and I tend to lead in with the idea of everybody's doing the best that they can, right? So let's give benefit of the doubt. Let's lean into positive intent. And I think that's important for employees to understand about their managers as well. That a lot of times in these moments of crisis or uncertainty, they don't have the answers, and that's okay. But they're making decisions with what information they do have, and they're trying to do the best that they can, unless it's gross misconduct, unless it's complete negligence with malicious intent. I don't believe that managers are trying to undermine employees' well-being in any way. And so if we can create that space as an organization where managers feel comfortable taking risks and making decisions without fear of being fired for them, because they've got that autonomy that we understand we're leaning into positive intent rather than malicious behavior, then managers will feel more comfortable taking those risks, making the decisions. And if employees can then understand that positive intent, then I think that creates a space where people feel more comfortable building trust and having those open communications. So leaning into positive intent, leaning into giving that autonomy without fear of repercussions, I think is really important.
Thank you. Sheila.
Yeah, somebody just posted in the chat, grace. It's like, really and truly, that's, I think, what leaders need from their employees, and the feedback, which is really what we've been talking about, right? Is we need to be able to accept that feedback and take that feedback and work with it, and be able to get to a place where we are really more. I think part of it is that dichotomy of leader and it's not a follower, it's a coworker, and that you need to really develop that kind of event as well. And I love what Jamie was talking about with making mistakes. And I think about probably one of the best pieces of advice, or one of the best things that I ever had a manager tell me was, hey, that's not the decision I would have made, but I'm always going to back you as long as you can tell me why you made it. And that was really very empowering for me, to be like, hey, if I can sit down with you and say, here's why I made this decision, and then we work together, and if that's not how you want things to go, you're going to educate me about how I could have done that differently. But in the meantime, you're not going to penalize me for having made that decision. That opens up the world to an employee. And so I think it's the same thing for the leader, right? The leader needs to feel that from the employee as well. Very real. Hey, I'm going to make mistakes. Just like you tell your kids, right? Your kids don't think you're ever going to make a mistake, but guess what? You do. So it's just kind of the same way. We just have to make sure that everybody understands we're all humans, we're all fallible, we all make mistakes, and make sure that we're communicating and talking about that and giving people that grace.
Carol.
Yeah, I love what's been said about, really taking that kind of human-centered approach and understanding that we're all human and we're all going to make mistakes. The only thing I would add is really probably from a much more tactical perspective. I think organizations owe it to their leaders to provide them with the information so that they can, help spread that communication path throughout the organization. So I think it's really information. And I think it's also setting the expectations that we really do expect managers and leaders within the organization to be that conduit of information and communication about what's going on or what we don't and do know in the organization. So really level setting those expectations and again giving leaders the ability to kind of put it in their own words and translate it so that everybody has the benefit of understanding the information that's available and out there.
If my memory serves me right, I think it was Sheila who, at the very, very beginning of our conversation, just gently scratched on this topic, but it went on a mental post-it. So I would like to come back and collect. And the question is, what is the HR flavor of leadership during times of uncertainty? How is the HR called to serve differently than other functional leaders during times of uncertainty? And I will just leave that question there and let's see. Well, Sheila.
Sorry.
Please.
I think it's a great question, actually, Manola. It really is. When there are issues in a company, when there are issues in an environment, when there are issues in the world, everybody comes to HR, right? So it's really important that we have the ability to, take on that kind of task. And it really, it's the bulk of the work during uncertain times. I mean, I think it's really amazing how much our HR teams took on during the pandemic and continue to take on because of turmoil in the world and the economy. And so I think, given the fact that we're all in HR struggling to balance what the company needs and what the employees need, and how do we blend that, I think it's really important for us to make sure we are not just taking care of everybody else, but that we then turn around and take care of ourselves. And I think that's true. It was certainly true in the healthcare industry. I mean, we saw a lot of burnout. We've seen physicians and providers leaving the field after the pandemic because it was just too much. And I think a lot of that could have been avoided had we done a better job as a community, not even just as HR, but certainly as a community, to make sure we were helping people and understanding what they were going through and giving them the resources they needed to make it through those times and offering the space. And I totally understand the flip side of that from the company is like, we need people to do the job. We've got to have this going on. But there really has to be a better balance of, how do we take on this work and how do we offload the emotions of the work that we're doing, and providing the tools to do that, I think, is definitely key. And then encouraging people to utilize those tools, training our managers to look for signs of fatigue and burnout, and rather than dealing with it as a performance issue, dealing with it as a human issue where you understand why maybe somebody missed something because they've got 85 other things to do and they're working at home and their kids are screaming at them, and all this stuff. That grace that we talked about that the managers needed, that's something that everybody needs when times get tough. And so I do think, the flavor of HR is help everybody else. That always seems to be it. But then I think we always need to make sure we say, and make sure we're, the self-care, the boundaries, all those things apply to us as well. And it's really hard I think, because we're in this field because we do care.
I see a lot of thoughtful nodding on my screen, and I see Zach leaning forward for the unmute button. So can we take Zach, and then Carol, we will get back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, just real quick. I think we as HR professionals, as the stewards of the human capital data, are responsible for really equipping all the leaders in the organization with the appropriate level of data so that they can make those decisions, right? So for example, if a leader or manager has a dispersed team around different geographies, then it's prudent for us to make sure that we equip those leaders to say, hey, your team lives within like further than 40 miles from the office, so let's figure out a flexible schedule so that they can do what they need to do in this like uncertain time and turbulent times and so on and so forth. But I would take a very data-driven approach because we are the shepherds of the data, right? How can we utilize all the data that's at our disposal to really inform the leaders, help them to guide the human capital strategy within their kind of groups, right? So I would just take this. I know we are the kind of the resource for all things like employee relations and benefits and comp and all sort of stuff, but we are also strategists, right? I think what is often overlooked and underutilized as an HR function is we are strategists, we're strategy partners. How do we help enable to move the business forward? So we do that with data-driven approaches as well. So we are as much as part of a business strategy as other parts of the business. Is just making sure that we are arming our leaders appropriately with the human capital data that they can properly leverage and utilize for those insights to really consider how they're managing their teams, to bring together everyone and to help support their teams at the local levels.
Thank you. Carol.
Well, Manola, you asked about flavors, and that got me thinking about ice cream. And if I were to have to relate this to, the work of HR during uncertain times to an ice cream, the first thing that popped to my head was Neapolitan ice cream. It's got very distinct lines of flavor and very different. It made me think about the different constituents that we might have as HR professionals. Sheila talked about, balancing the needs of the organization and the needs of the individuals that make up that organization. So it really is this balancing act. And, Zach talked about HR professionals being strategists, and sometimes being a strategy partner comes with, making tough decisions and grappling with sensitive, confidential information, whether that's we have to plan a layoff or we're exiting this particular line of business because it's no longer viable given the current market conditions. Oftentimes HR is really at the forefront of that. And so when I think back to the Neapolitan ice cream, there's one role that you have to play that strategist, but that may not be the same role that you play when you're delivering, well-being solutions to the organization, or, processing payroll and time off. All of those things have to happen, and they have to happen simultaneously. But again, you have different constituents, and you may need to show up a little bit differently depending upon that role that you're occupying at the time. So I think it's really incumbent, to go back to what Sheila said, it's really incumbent upon the HR team itself to have an opportunity to really take care of ourselves, because that kind of, shifting of responsibilities, shifting of audiences, adds just another layer of complexity and sometimes uncertainty to the work that we're doing every day. So it's very, very important that we take care of ourselves in that equation, because we may have, privileged information that we can't share. We may have to interact with employees in a way that might seem a little backhanded, and that takes its toll on people as well. So maintaining that ability to compartmentalize and also have that psychological safety to come together as a team, because of the different roles that we play within the organization.
I think as HR leaders, we have a responsibility to set that tone in a proactive way. Don't wait for the crisis to happen. You know, the uncertainty and times of fear are going to continue to come. This is not a roller coaster that we're getting off of anytime soon. The rate of change, as Carol said, is happening, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. So creating space and time within HR departments to proactively be ready for how to not maybe not specific things, but we have options. We know where and what our resources are for different areas of uncertainty or crisis, and spending time going through proactively some of that crisis training or certifications and some of those types of things. That way you can go into times of uncertainty more confident, more ready, and you can be on that strategist mindset rather than getting too bogged down in and I say this lovingly because I'm an empath, but with the emotions that are involved in some of these really hard and tough conversations to have. And that's how I try to manage my own self-care and mental health in dealing with these situations in a very human way. I'm human too. And so the more we can be proactively ready to take on challenges, it doesn't matter what those challenges are, it gives us that confidence to navigate through them without getting deterred and distracted.
It's so painful and frustrating for me to say that we are about 15 minutes away from saying goodbye. I feel like we could easily go on for at least one more hour on this topic. And I have to admit, I have been struggling with wording the next question. So please bear with me as I will speak as I think, which can be quite risky at times. From what you shared on the panel, from some of the comments that I read throughout our conversation, it's very clear that the needs during times of uncertainty are profoundly individual. And there is no such thing as a silver bullet or one size fits all. So I will not ask the question like, what is one strategy or one program or one solution? I would try to rephrase it along the lines. If you could advise a leader leading an organization during times of uncertainty, that if they have one extra drop of energy, where to focus it? Is there a certain area of focus that would really bring in that extra mile for well-being and team cohesion? Carol.
For me, the first thing that comes to mind is active listening. Because as you mentioned, Manola, it's not a one size fits all, and it's really a one size fits one. And I think leaders can be most effective if they create the spaces and the opportunities for active listening, because you're going to hear, hopefully, from the individuals that you're supporting, that you're leading, what's most important to them. And then you can customize those solutions from there. But I think without starting from that perspective, you're going to miss opportunities or perhaps make assumptions that are not going to get you as far ahead as you might be if you employed that strategy, I guess, of really trying to be an active listener.
For me, it would be lead in the way that you want to be led. And when I say that, it's with the idea of think about the time that you were the most scared in your entire life. Or if that's never happened to you, awesome. Think about what would be the most scariest time in your entire life. And then think about how you would want to be led through that. In any time of uncertainty or any situation, there's going to be someone in the group where this is the scariest moment. This is the scariest thing that they've ever been through. And think about all of that fear and all of that emotion and all of that uncertainty for this is their scariest time, and then lead through that in that compassion, with compassion in your actions, lead through that in not discrediting or displacing their emotions, but acknowledging that it's there, and helping them through that in a way that allows for them to come with you. Don't There's no room for degrading, there's no room for ego, there's no room for dismissive. All of that has to be left aside. This is the scariest moment for any one person that they're going through in their life so far. Let's help them and lead them in the way that you would want to be led through that.
Sheila.
Yeah, I think I love what Carol said about active listening. And I think to me, that's an aspect of what my one word would be, which is connection. And that is really getting back to that, having human conversations, doing all that. I do, though, think that that can't be done. Again, it's not a one size fits all. Making sure that everyone is included. And there's a lot of ways to do that. There's, you've got ERGs potentially where you can, reach out to folks who might not otherwise get that attention, working through your managers to get through everyone. But I think also in the HR capacity is listening to what you're hearing from the people about what is it they're looking for. During the pandemic, there was an individual employee at Zoom who reached out and said, listen, I just came to the United States to take this job. I'm living in a town I've never been in before. I have no friends and I'm working from home and I'm going to go stir crazy. And how do I meet anybody? How do I do all of this? And of course, she lived across the states from me. So it wasn't like I could go over and have coffee with her, which I would have loved to do. But we met several times and talked about it. And finally, I encouraged her to reach out, and I helped her reach out to in our company chat to talk about, hey, are there other people that are feeling like this, other singles who are really struggling, and let's get together and have a conversation. And so they did develop their own little group of people. So it's looking at that data and making sure you're kind of planning and thinking about every demographic that you've got. It's really tough because, if you've got 4,000 people, you have 4,000 different sets of demographics, and no two are going to be completely alike. But it is really important to listen. It is important to connect and connect authentically, and really then work with that person or with, a group, whether it's one person or a group, to help make a change and make a positive change that gets them where they need to be and where they want to be.
Zach.
Yeah, totally agree with all that's been said. I'm just going to double click on Sheila and Carol's and just quite simply say, be available, right? It's as simple as that. And what we're all talking about is creating space to meet with staff, whether it be in one-on-one formats, in group formats. Just be available, whether it be an hour or half hour a week, whether it be, whatever. I know there are business mandates and objectives to be met, but being available is part of your job. Retention is part of your job, part of all of our jobs as leaders, right? I think that's something it's so commonly there's like a common misconception that retention is an HR mandate. No, it's a business and leader mandate. So when you think about what can leaders do, it's just be available. And be open to what your teams are talking about and figuring out how to best support them so that they can show up in the best way that they can. It's mind, body, and spirit, right? So it's just simply be available. I cannot overstate that. There's so many times where people are like just so intimidated by their leaders, like, oh, they're busy, they got this, that, and the other on their schedule. But it's the leader's responsibility. It's incumbent upon the leaders to create that culture where they know that their team can come to them with anything at any point in time. And I'm recognizing that there's scheduling that needs to happen at some point, but making sure that there's a culture of kind of open candor and communication and just being simply available. It's just so important.
Mm. I have a special invitation to all of you on the panel. And let's take a handful of the remaining 6 minutes and really have a topic-free contribution. So I am sure that each and every one of you have a particular piece of either information or reflection or advice that you want to leave with our audience. And maybe we didn't get to cover it under any of the questions so far. So this is the open mic, topic-free round of answers. And just as inspiration will strike, we will do this popcorn style. What is something that you really want to leave our audience with that we didn't get the chance to cover until now in our conversation? Let's see where inspiration strikes. Jamie.
Lean into community. The hard part sometimes about HR is there's a lot of HR departments of one. There's people that have hit that burnout level and they've left the profession maybe to go into consulting. We are making great strides as a profession to enhance our what we bring to the table and leaning into data and becoming those strategy experts. And I don't want to see that end because of burnout and times of uncertainty. So don't feel like you're alone. There's a lot of really good HR communities out there. Find the one that speaks to you and don't be afraid to lean into it, especially as a way to help mitigate some of the stress, some of the self-care that you might need.
Thank you. Where shall we go next? Sheila, would you like to take it from here?
Sure, absolutely. I think one thing we heard throughout the pandemic and continue to hear is self-care. And I just don't think it can be stressed enough. And it's not just encouraging everybody else to do that, but actually doing it ourselves, which is the hardest piece of advice to take. It is really so important. And this was a lesson I learned during the pandemic, and really, so I always tell everybody, I'm not a great role model, but I am a good cautionary tale. So take the time to take the break, take the 5 minutes between meetings, do the walking, do whatever it is that mentally takes you away from your screen and away from your work for a few times during the day, so that you're actually getting a break, and a physical break, a mental break. Those things are really important. Scheduling time with your family, setting your boundaries about the hours that you're willing to work and what the exceptions are for those hours. What is truly an emergency and what is not. You need to be able to have those discussions when you're asked to do something that's presented as an emergency, and have the conversation about, is it really an emergency, or is this just part of the hype of this, everything has to be done right now, because that's not necessarily true. And really, I think about all the times where, especially when I was in compensation, it was like, there's no such thing as a compensation emergency. Like it's nothing that you're going to solve in an hour, right? You're going to need to pull the team. You're going to have to do things. And I think that's true in a lot of areas of HR. Certainly there are times where there is a peak of need and events happen and things go on at work and you've got to jump in, but set those boundaries. And I just don't think I can repeat that enough to people, and not just as a regular employee, but specifically as an HR professional, as an HR leader, as an HR entry level position. You have to take care of yourself. We're all tired of hearing it, but the oxygen mask definitely has to go on first.
Thank you. Zach.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I would just say, just strengthen your inclusive leadership acumen. It's so important to ensure that you are strengthening your ability to be to your cross-cultural communication, right? Especially with diverse teams, inclusive teams. just as a quick data point, right? Inclusive teams that have strong inclusive practices, inclusion practices, really make decisions much faster, almost twice as fast as teams that are not. Which really leads to and correlates to a team's ability to adapt and innovate, especially in times of uncertainty. So, just strengthen inclusive leadership acumen, strengthen your cross-cultural communication abilities, and go from there.
Thank you. Carol.
Well, we've talked about it from the leadership perspective, but I wanted to stress it from an HR professional perspective as well, is the concept of grace. Give yourself grace as an HR professional. And we also talked about it from a leadership capacity, but also, being comfortable in the ambiguity. Oftentimes people come to HR for the answers, and it's okay to not have all the answers during times of change and uncertainty. So I think if you lean into that concept of grace and that concept of it's okay to not have all the answers, we need to reflect that on ourselves and our profession as well.
Thank you all so very much. And I am not ready to cancel our wrap-up mic drop round. You know how this will go. The question is the following. If you could define the most meaningful impact of leadership during times of uncertainty in one word and one word alone, what would that word be? I will give you a few seconds to think about it while I just wholeheartedly thank everybody in the audience, either now or later as you enjoy the recording. Thank you so very much for being here, for engaging with the conversation through your comments. And we could not have hoped for a better feedback than one comment that I saw a few minutes ago. I want all my leaders to listen to this conversation. That is such a great appreciation and acknowledgement of all your insights. So in the interest of time, I will pass the mic around just as we did when we started. One word, Sheila.
Connection.
Carol.
Sheila took my word. Neapolitan ice cream? I know that's 3 words.
But if you say it quickly enough, it sounds like one. So that's okay. Jamie.
Hope.
Hope. And Zach.
Empathy.
Sheila, Carol, Jamie, Zach, you've been such a gift and such a privilege. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Jessa, for taking such great care of us as usual. And I hope I will get to welcome you to many more conversations in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.